If you've ever just stood there and watched a lionfish glide across a reef tank, it's utterly mesmerizing. With those elaborate flowing fins and striking patterns, lionfish and their scorpionfish cousins are absolutely the undisputed centerpieces of any marine aquarium. But look, behind that breathtaking beauty lies a very real danger. We're talking about venomous ambush hunters here. They pack a sting that can cause agonizing pain, and their strike speed is literally measured in milliseconds. Basically, they're the underwater equivalent of a T-Rex. Bringing an apex predator like that into your home requires a whole lot more than just sprinkling some flakes into the water and hoping for the best. If you want these magnificent creatures to genuinely thrive, you've got to have a flawless, safety-first routine. So, welcome to this explainer, where we're going to break down the exact, structured protocol for safely and successfully feeding your lionfish and scorpionfish.
All right, here is the roadmap for our explainer today. 1. Meet the ambush predators. 2. Choosing the right prey. 3. Safe handling and tools. 4. Mastering the feeding schedule. And finally, 5. Red flags and tank health.
Okay, let's dive into part 1. Meet the ambush predators.
Okay, let's really dive into understanding what makes feeding these specific fish so uniquely demanding. These aren't your typical grazing reef fish, right? Their entire biology is literally designed around waiting in the shadows and striking with just incredible speed. So there is a massive difference between casual feeding and precision feeding. Now, that casual, just toss in the food approach might seem totally fine when you first get your fish, and hey, it might even work in the short term. But honestly, that casual mindset is incredibly dangerous for both you and your aquarium. When you're dealing with a venomous predator, you absolutely need precision feeding. This is a disciplined approach that actively prioritizes 3 things: your physical safety, the specific nutritional needs of an ambush hunter, and the long-term stability of your tank's water conditions.
And the stakes here are remarkably high. If you fail to adopt that precision approach, you're essentially setting off a chain reaction of failures in your tank. Improper portioning, or giving them unsuitable prey, directly contributes to poor digestion and serious nutritional gaps. But actually, perhaps the biggest immediate threat to your aquarium is the excessive waste. Remember, these are large fish eating very large meals, and improper feeding creates this massive biological load that will severely stress out your tank's filtration system.
Moving right along to section 2, choosing the right prey.
In the wild, these fish consume nutrient-dense whole prey. So your primary goal in captivity is to mimic that diet as closely as humanly possible. Acceptable meaty prey includes things like marine fish fillets cut into appropriate chunks, silver sides, shrimp, and other whole seafood options. You kind of want to think of it as preparing a premium seafood platter for a very discerning guest. You always want to select fresh prey items whenever possible and provide a good variety of these approved foods. Mixing up the menu between the shrimp, the silver sides, and the marine fillets is hands down the best way to reduce the risk of any long-term nutritional imbalances.
But knowing what to feed them is really only half the battle. So how big should their food actually be? Because if you get this wrong, your fish could easily choke, or they might just flat out refuse the meal altogether.
So, the crucial point is understanding this concept of the gape. The gape is simply the wide mouth opening of the fish. Lionfish and scorpionfish typically take whole, meaty prey that they can swallow completely without having to tear it apart first. As a general baseline, you always want to aim for prey that is roughly sized to the fish's gape. Think of it kind of like a snake unhinging its jaw. The food needs to be small enough to be ingested easily for sure, but it also has to be large enough to trigger that natural predatory hunting strike. They need to be able to take it down in one fluid motion.
All right, on to part 3, safe handling and tools.
Now that we've got the right food and it's perfectly sized, let's talk about the physical execution of feeding. These 3 steps are absolute golden rules for aquarist safety. Step 1. You must use feeding tools. Long tongs or feeding sticks are your best friends here. Step 2. Keep your hands and your face well away from the strike zones. These fish move way faster than you might expect the second food hits the water. And step 3. Keep the feeding areas uncluttered and predictable. Offer the food at the same time each day in a nice, clear area of the tank. If you've got multiple predators in there, an uncluttered space ensures that feeding time doesn't suddenly trigger aggressive collisions at the surface or cause them to accidentally crash into tight rockwork.
Listen, I absolutely cannot emphasize this next point enough. Never,
ever attempt to handle a lionfish or scorpionfish or deliver their food with bare hands. I mean, we all know their spines can deliver incredibly painful venomous stings, but what a lot of hobbyists don't realize is that even so-called non-spiny contact around their fins and hard body edges can cause really significant injuries. There's simply no excuse to have your bare hands anywhere near the strike zone. Always use your tongs. Which brings us to part 4, mastering the feeding schedule.
Once you've mastered safely delivering the food, your next pillar of care is long-term management. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it addresses overfeeding, which is hands down one of the most common causes of problems in captive systems. For the adults, feeding once a day or even every other day is usually entirely sufficient. Juveniles, on the other hand, well, they're growing rapidly, so they might require more frequent meals. The practical approach here is to feed them in small portions that get consumed within a short window and then just step back and observe.
Because you really need to actively monitor how your tank and your fish respond to the feeding schedule over time. Are they maintaining a healthy weight and good overall body condition? Are they eager and ready at feeding time? And honestly, most importantly, what do your water tests say after a big meal? If you start seeing spikes in ammonia or nitrate, or if you're consistently spotting excess uneaten food just lying around, that is a massive, direct signal that you need to reduce your portion sizes and your feeding frequency immediately.
And speaking of uneaten food, good feeding hygiene is absolutely non-negotiable. You must remove any uneaten food promptly. Do not just leave it in there to rot in the sandbed. You also really need to avoid repeatedly offering food that has deteriorated or maybe been stored in your freezer for way too long. Poor food handling rapidly degrades your water quality, and it significantly increases the likelihood of digestive upset for your fish.
Finally, let's wrap up with part 5, red flags and tank health. Look, even with a great routine, things can occasionally go off track. But there is a really stark difference between a normal, successful feed and a developing problem. Normal feeding behavior is smooth. It's characterized by a quick, controlled strike followed by swallowing without any prolonged distress. Concerning signs, on the other hand, include a persistent refusal to eat, a fish that repeatedly drops or spits out the prey right after grabbing it, weird buoyancy issues, or if the fish suddenly appears super lethargic right after feeding.
If you see any of those concerning signs popping up, here is your rapid-fire troubleshooting checklist. First up, reassess the prey size. Remember that gape rule we talked about? If they're spitting it out, the food might simply be too big. Second, check the food freshness. Third, try to identify any tank stressors, like maybe a newly introduced incompatible tank mate that's harassing them. And fourth, pull out your test kits and check your water quality immediately.
I want to highlight a really powerful quote straight from the source material. Many lionfish/scorpionfish issues start with husbandry factors, so a careful review often prevents escalation. That beautifully summarizes why this entire structured protocol matters so much. These fish are actually remarkably resilient if their environment and their diet are dialed in correctly. When something goes wrong, it almost always traces back to an error in husbandry, either the water quality, the food size, or the schedule itself.
Which leaves us with this final, important thought to chew on. Is casual husbandry risking the life of your beautiful apex predator? Relying on a lazy, toss-in-the-food mentality is basically a recipe for poor nutrition, degraded water, and a very real potential injury to yourself. But by using your tongs, carefully matching the prey to the gape, maintaining strict tank hygiene, and keeping an eye out for those red flags, you are guaranteeing a stable, thriving environment. You now have the exact blueprint you need to safely feed these magnificent hunters. Start implementing this precision routine today and just watch your predators absolutely thrive. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and happy reefing!